Thanks, Mel. All right, our next speaker, I'm very pleased to introduce Sam Bro, Mental Health Promotion to Building Resilience Strategies from the Mental Health Commission of Canada. Sam and I have known each other for, oh, sorry about that. I'll try to get rid of those messages. Anyways, I'm going to pass the slide over to you, and just, I'm going to be your van and white, because my computer doesn't work on that pointer, so just let me know when to do it. All right.
Is there a mic lapel, I guess, for the live stream where we're good now?
Yeah, we're good. Good.
There we go, so I guess I'm the lucky one.
Yeah.
Well, welcome everyone, I guess. Thank you so much for being here, and most importantly, thank you to Badge of Life of Canada to inviting me here. And certainly I also wanted to start by acknowledging the privilege of presenting to you today on unceded Algonquin territory. And so, as Bill and Sid mentioned, my name is Samuel Bro. I'm a program manager with the Mental Health Commission of Canada. And today I'll be talking a little bit about stigma and really talking about what we can do on the prevention and promotion end of things to look at some of the tools and solutions that we have. And also I'll be presenting to you a model that I've been working with a doctor named Dr. Bill Howitt, who's with Morneau Chappelle, to try to think differently about the different loads of stresses that we carry. So we have work stress loads, we have life stress loads, and I'll go into that a little bit. But before I get any further, and I'm sure we'll figure out the technological parts as we go on. It works now? Oh, there we go. Awesome. Let's see if that works. Oh, yeah, okay. So, 15, maybe 20 years ago, and I won't tell you my age, but I'm sure some of you are guessing. But 15, 20 years ago, I probably wouldn't have started this discussion by telling you, that I suffered a mild panic attack on my way coming here, knowing that I was presenting in front of a large room. But thankfully, because of the great work of groups like Badge of Life of Canada and different mental health stakeholders, we're talking about mental health. We're able to, share our stories, also share positive stories of recovery, and what a great presentation and how privileged I felt this morning hearing Gary's story. But the fact is that still today, if we were going to have an emergency, let's say, there's a fire alarm today, most of you would probably know what to do. In fact, I think we probably just run out of the front door. It's quite a straight line, and we run outside. If I suffer or have a really intense panic attack right now in this room, can anyone raise their hand who would feel comfortable knowing what to do in this situation to calm me down and refer me to the appropriate services? Raise your hand. So there's a few folks, so that's starting to get better. But still, we're not quite feeling, confident, and that's fine. That's just because we're still getting to learn about mental health and mental illness. And unfortunately, and this is getting better, so I don't want to leave on a negative note, but unfortunately, in many workplaces, you can have two identical scenarios. In fact, I've heard this story many times where, a captain of a fire service or a superintendent will say, well, I've often had situations where there were two guys off at the same time, one with the cancer, the other one with a mental illness, and how the boys or the folks and the women on the floor dealt with it was completely different. So on one side we had the cake, we had the balloons, we had everything, we had the welcome party when they were coming back. On the other side, unfortunately, folks didn't really know what to do or say. And it's important to note, didn't know what to do or say, because it's not because we don't want to do something, it's because we also don't feel comfortable. We don't know if we're asking the right question, we're kind of tippy-toeing around this. And for management, for leadership, in fact, sometimes it's hard to have those conversations with their staff, or even to initiate the conversation. Am I going to be too intrusive? Am I going to be appearing as though I'm pushing the case, that I want to be mindful? So it's this delicate dance that we're still trying to figure out. And the good news is that there are great programs and tools out there, and there are great stories that we're starting to learn. So I'm encouraged, we're really encouraged when we see groups of these gathering, and the great work that Badge of Life of Canada has been doing in putting these conferences on, a little bit across Ontario and eventually across the country, to share these stories, share these best practices, and really leave folks on a hopeful note towards recovery. And so I'm going to show you this short clip. A little warning, I guess, that it could be triggering if you're sensitive to accident scenes, although there is nothing to be gruesome. It's meant to be as a conversation piece. I'll take maybe 1 or 2 minutes afterwards to talk about it. And so we'll show you this to start. So you hear the sound. Try it. 2016, we're still figuring out technology. It's okay.
Yeah. So it's all,
No, it's all.
here we go.
It's not meant to be stressful.
It's fine. It's not even weird.
He's probably just looking for attention.
He's just crazy.
So any thoughts? Did you see that video? We haven't talked or engaged it with the audience, so I'm looking for some interaction. How do you feel the victim would have felt in this situation? Pardon me? Abandoned? Do you feel that the victim or the individual that suffered the accident would have felt comfortable asking for help after hearing all of the comments from folks around? And how do you think it unfolded around? There were bystanders around. Did everyone react the same initially? People were looking, then eventually someone said something. Then there was kind of like the groupthink that formed around that. So there's, usually a leader or someone that kind of has that presence, and then not intentionally perhaps, but leads others to react in the same way. So we can imagine that in this circumstance, this is physical illness or physical accident, but imagine how that translates when we're talking about mental illness or mental health. And so as the image on the screen right now displays, stigma can be a huge barrier. And I think most of us are familiar with social stigma or cultural stigma, which is the idea that we have certain perceptions about groups or individuals. And there's positive stigma. Usually first responders are seen as being, heroic and stoic and strong in circumstances, but conversely, that also prevents first responders sometimes as seeing themselves as being vulnerable people that might have to deal with some of the issues and circumstances that they deal with. So that turns into self-stigma, because it's easy to talk about mental health or mental illness when it affects others. But then when we talk about ourselves, that's a whole other scenario. And in fact, over the last few years, as I've been really focusing on first responders' mental health, I've just been inspired by the work that I've seen across the country with first responders groups, including the work that Badge of Life Canada has been doing, because there are so many brave first responders that are willing to share their stories and demonstrate that it is okay to be vulnerable. It is okay, in fact, to talk about mental health or mental illness or physical health or physical illness, because ultimately it's all part of your global health. And if it wasn't because of that work that I've been inspired from or inspired by, I myself wouldn't have felt comfortable to now talk that I live with a generalized anxiety disorder. I was part of a mental illness awareness campaign this year. And so, we think about the work that first responders do. We think about the work that you're doing in sharing your stories within your own network, but think also about the impact that you're having on others, because I think if you're first responders and you're seen as the heroic models and you're now able to talk about your mental health, then imagine the impact that you're having on other Canadians by now demonstrating that it's okay for a police officer, a firefighter, a dispatcher, a paramedic to talk about their mental health. And if we reach these last bastion, like first responders, I think we've made some significant inroads in terms about how we're talking about mental health. And so I won't really go too much further into this. I believe Lynette did a great job, and others previously in demonstrating or acknowledging the amount of impact that your work has on you as first responders in some of the situations that you might face. And so, it doesn't mean that you're not able to deal with it, but it's about building resilience. It's about looking at preventative measures in the workplace. It's about anticipating some of the things that you might have to deal with, and ultimately being okay to seek treatment or help or resources once you have felt or dealt with a critical incident. We often talk about PTSD, and certainly you've seen here in Ontario we have presumptive legislation that was passed earlier this year. Across the country we're talking about a national action plan on PTSD. And the Mental Health Commission and other mental health stakeholders, I think, we've been really intentional in reminding ourselves that there are other operational stress injuries. In fact, they've been there long before we were talking about PTSD. But PTSD often comes into play long after there have been other operational stress injuries or other illnesses at play. And so we don't want it to get to that point. What we should, or what we hope to be talking about, is getting folks the help that they need earlier so that they can seek recovery and shorten that recovery period and also improve the quality of life of others. So you might be familiar with some of the other operational stress injuries, and some of those were talked about this morning, like addictions or depression and anxiety. But all that to say that we need to be aware and mindful about all of the operational stress injuries that could impact first responders. Traditionally, we've talked about mental health and mental illness as an either-or scenario. In your workplace, you're either mentally healthy, and if you're mentally ill, you're probably gone and nobody knows where you are. So all of a sudden you're healthy, and then you're ill, you're out of the workplace, nobody really knows about your situation, folks are making their own stories or trying to make sense of it, because we are sense-making beings, and so without a narrative, we create our own narrative, and there's no blame there. That's just how we are as human beings. So again, this is important to remind ourselves as we unpack this mental health conversation. What we have been working on at the Mental Health Commission with other partners is expanding how we think about mental health and mental illness. And there's a great tool that's been developed through the Department of National Defense. Many of you might be familiar with a program called Road to Mental Readiness. And through this program, we use a continuum to expand how we think about mental health, to ultimately recognize that our mental health ranges on any given day. And everyone that spoke before me this morning did a great job of acknowledging all of these situations. It doesn't have to be a critical event, but just being in traffic in the morning, or being stuck on a tarmac in an airplane because they have to de-ice, or once all of the passengers are loaded, they've realized that there was a mechanical issue, and I mean, come on, we could go into this, but your mental health at that stage might be moving into the yellow. And that comes with different behaviors and changes in mood and thinking. And if you're not aware of this could actually prolong and move into the orange. And eventually, if you're facing other critical events or other stressful